It's me, Shruti, and today we're going to talk about a sample question for today's lesson. So just to recap, I'm Shruti Goli, and I am a PM2 at Microsoft, and I've been working on the Microsoft Endpoint Manager team. So in total, I've been working there for about 3 years, and I've been promoted twice in 2 years. And I was also an intern recruit for Microsoft. I have a background in computer science, and I studied at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And at any point in time, if you guys have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me at the email below, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions. So without further ado, today we're going to talk about the product execution question, and we're actually going to do a sample question. I'm going to walk you through how I might answer these things, and I'm also going to walk you through what the interviewer might say. And lastly, I would hope that you guys also put me on pause throughout this presentation, think through some of the questions that I'm asking you or that are being asked and some of the steps that we're walking through, and see how you would approach this question. So let's get started. So product execution questions test your ability to A, comprehend the situation, B, identify your customer, C, report customer and business needs, D, cut through prioritization, L, list solutions, E, evaluate trade-offs, and S, summarize recommendations. So this may be familiar to you guys, the circles method. You may have heard about it before, and I've done a previous foundational video where I explain and go through the circles method in detailed. But this is what your interviewer is really looking for, to be able to see that you're able to explain the problem back to them. You're able to understand who's the customer that you're working for, what are the business needs that this company has, and how are you as a product manager going to be able to think of different solutions for a certain problem and be able to evaluate the trade-offs. And then lastly, product managers in the workforce are looked at being super concise. And so they want to be able to test those skills when they're looking to how you summarize those recommendations. So let's get started. So the first sample question, you are the PM for Xbox's Game Pass. How would you decide whether to build a feature or fix an engineering bug, assuming that they take the same engineering resources? Now, first things first, you read this question, you might have 100 thoughts in your head. Don't jump to the answer, right? Simply take that in, write down any notes if you have a notepad or mental notes. So how I would break this down really is, okay, Xbox's Game Pass. First of all, me personally, I don't use Xbox. I've never played Xbox with an Xbox before. I wouldn't know what Game Pass is if I were in this interview right now. So that would be like my first thoughts in my head. Like, okay, if I'm the PM for Xbox's Game Pass, how am I supposed to answer this question when I don't know what the product is, right? And so that brings us to C, comprehend the question, and don't be afraid to ask any clarifying questions, right? So definitely ask your interviewer, okay, what's Game Pass? Because I myself wouldn't know what that is. How many users use Game Pass? What is Game Pass's current business model and revenue? And repeat the scenario and your understandings back. So let's say the interviewer says, okay, Game Pass is a subscription-based service to access hundreds of games within Xbox. So you pay X amount of money, $15 per user per month, and then you can get access to all of these games. So if the interviewer tells me that, then I'm able to understand a few things from what he said, or he or she just said, right? A is, okay, Game Pass is a subscription service. B is that the user must already have access to an Xbox or already own an Xbox in order to subscribe to Game Pass. C, this is a separate offering from Game Pass. And then D, they are generating their own revenue and they're their own product by itself. So how many users use Game Pass, right? Let's say there's 20 million users on Game Pass. And what is Game Pass's current business model and revenue? So like the interviewer mentioned before, this is a subscription-based service, and they might be generating $20 million a month in monthly revenue. And so gathering all of these different notes that you've heard from the interviewer, I would summarize all of that information, and then I would go ahead and answer it back to the interviewer. So something that I would say is, okay, here's what I comprehend from the situation. Right now, I'm the PM of Xbox's Game Pass. Xbox and Game Pass are separate offerings, and Xbox is something that a user must own before they can subscribe to Game Pass. When they subscribe to Game Pass, it's an additional cost for the user, and they might be paying a monthly fee in addition to that one-time fee that they paid for the Xbox. In terms of the business model, it's a subscriptions model, so users are charged on a monthly rate. It sounds like the revenue is $20 million and there's 20 million users. Is that about right? Do you think I have a good handle of the situation? And this is my understanding of it. So if we're aligned, then I'll continue to proceed. And if your interviewer says, yep, that makes sense, Shruti, like you're on the right track, this shows me that you understand the question. And so with that, you can go to the next step, identifying the customer persona. So some questions that I ask myself internally is, who are Xbox's customers? Who are Game Pass's customers, right? And something that we identified in the last situation when we're comprehending the question is that their customer base overlaps, right? So it sounds like Game Pass is a subset of the customer persona within Xbox. So that's something that you should mention to your interviewer, and that I would mention to my interviewer to help show them that you're really thinking through who the customer persona is. If I were to make some more guesses about who the customer persona is, I believe that there might be a couple different personas, right? One being the avid game player who loves to play different games and loves accessing different games at different times, but can't afford to buy every single game individually. And so that's someone who might subscribe to Game Pass, right? Another person is someone who pays to get played video games, right? So there's a lot of video game players on Twitch, for example. And so maybe that Game Pass customers are people who like to play games all the time and want it at a convenient cost. And so that might, like someone who's a video game player where other people watch them on Twitch, which is a platform that people watch people play video games, they might be another customer persona. So what I would do is I would think of a couple different customer personas and give it to your interviewer. So say, this is customer persona A, this is customer persona B that I think could come out of this product. And then say, like, take a wild guess, or not a wild guess, take a guess with backing and explain to your interviewer, okay, I think customer persona A is the persona that we should be focusing on because they're the majority of the customers in Game Pass's subscription today. And I think it's fair to say, like, that throughout this interview process, obviously this question is very vague in a sense. And so it's important to extremely clarify all of your thoughts with your interviewer. So if that means you have to repeat yourself, not obviously over repeat yourself, but if you have to repeat the question back to the interviewer, if you need to repeat, here's what I'm thinking between the different customer personas, and here's my logic on why I'm choosing this persona as the one that we're going to talk about today, make sure all of your logic is carried across to the interviewer. So the interviewer might be like, hey, Shruti, you're on the right track, and I think you're correct. Customer persona A seems like a good persona to go after. Or they might say, hey, I actually think the persona B might be the majority stake, or the one that I want you to focus on in this interview. So really navigate and understand where your interviewer wants you to go as they're leading you. And then B, also keep making educated answers as you are going through this interview. Reporting customer and business needs. So I think in order to understand and clarify this back to the interview, there's two aspects, right? One is the customer and one is the business. So from the customer's point of view, we talked about a customer persona, one who loves accessing a ton of different games but can't afford all of them. So they might go to Game Pass to access hundreds of games with one subscription fee, and they can still use their Xbox whenever they need. The other hand is the business need, right? So Microsoft is the company that owns this Game Pass subscription service. They also own Xbox, right? So I think it's important to understand, first of all, how is Game Pass contributing to the overall Microsoft revenue or even Xbox revenue? And is it helping? Is it not helping? Etc. Right? So you should feel empowered to ask your interviewer questions like, how much profit does Game Pass currently bring to the company? How are customers responding to Game Pass today? How does the new feature impact customer and business needs? What is this new feature, right? If you think back to the question, as a PM of Game Pass, I have to decide right now whether I want to implement a new feature or whether I want to fix a bug, since it takes the same engineering resources. So it's important to understand, what does that feature do? What's the impact to the customer and business needs? And also, how does the bug fix impact customer and business needs, right? For example, if you have a new feature that is going to bring in 2x the amount of revenue, right? Versus the bug fix might be bringing in 1x the revenue, like for the business, for Microsoft, you might go after the 2x feature. But if the bug fix is a critical aspect for customers accessing Game Pass, then you might go after the bug fix instead of a feature that might be bringing 2 million, because your end result would be losing all the money that you are making currently with Game Pass today. And so I would honestly, like, if I were to report the customer and business needs to the interviewer, I again would ask any clarifying questions, like such as these, and then I would summarize everything that you've learned back. So I would say, hey, interviewer, like, in terms of the customer needs, it's someone who loves to play games. It's someone who needs to be able to access this frequently because they like to try different games on Game Pass. Versus the business needs is Microsoft wants to maintain the amount of revenue that they have at the minimum with the opportunity to grow. So whether they enable a new feature or they fix a bug, they do not want a negative impact to their current revenue. They only want positive impact, right? And that tells the interviewer that you're thinking about the different customer and business needs. Cut through prioritization. So in the circles method, we talked about, this second C that you see here is cutting through prioritization. And it typically applies in a product execution round when you have questions like, think of a new feature for Satya Nadella to enable on Microsoft PowerPoint, right? That's when you have a bunch of features that you're thinking through. You're going to list them out to your interviewer and you're going to go through each one. Here are the pros and cons. Here's how it impacts the business. Here's how it impacts the customer. And you're going to share all of your thoughts to the interviewer. But in this particular question, this cut through prioritization is actually not that relevant, right? Because you're deciding between enabling a new feature or fixing a bug. So this is a very critical part of the reason I really like this question, and I really like using the circles method in this question, is because it's a good lesson for everyone listening to this foundational video, right? You have to tailor the circle method to your question. So you guys have learned about a lot of frameworks such as the STAR method, circle method, etc., right? And so it's really important to leverage these frameworks, but in an appropriate manner. So in this case, cut through prioritization is not applicable at all. And so going ahead and trying to use that C, even though it's not relevant, will actually show the interviewer that you're not as confident about answering these questions. And so I would take a step back and think, as you're thinking about, okay, what comes next in circles? Okay, C, cut through prioritization. Make sure you think about how does it apply to the question before just jumping into it. So actually, I wouldn't even go through this step. I would go straight from report customer and business needs all the way to listing the solutions. And when you're enlisting the solutions, this part is really important, right? Because this is the key to A, whether you should enable a new feature, or B, if you should talk about the bug and how it's going to impact the customer and the business. So if I were to answer this to the interviewer, I would say, so from my understanding, this feature is about to bring in $5 million of revenue to Microsoft's Game Pass by enabling it. This feature will impact the entire customer base and will enable more customers to join in a very seamless manner directly from Xbox, right? And that's the impact to the customer and the business. The customer is going to be extremely happy and have more access, to more games maybe. And as a result, they're going to be happier. While the bug fix, my understanding from all of our discussion is that currently, the problem that they're experiencing with this bug is that new users are not able to sign up for Game Pass, right? And so my understanding is that if new users are not able to sign up for the Game Pass feature, then even though we have a new feature that we might need to enable that might increase sales, we will not be able to increase sales if the main blocker bug is that the sign up flow is not working, right? Because all of that revenue from that new feature would not be brought. In addition, you would be losing a lot more money to brand new customers that you could have gained regardless of that feature, correct? And so you're actually at a net loss over time for the business rather than actually increasing revenue. And meanwhile, new customers will have a poor user experience because they will not be able to sign up and they may be turned off from the Game Pass feature completely or Game Pass product completely as a result. And if you guys take a pause and heard everything that I just said, you heard me talking about the pros and cons of enabling a feature or fixing the bug and how it impacts the customer and business. How I explained it and how I weighed it, the two options, and showed the interviewer just now about my knowledge about these two options and how I understand it as a PM and how I would navigate it, especially if the engineering resources are the same, is very critical, right? And so evaluating trade-offs is the next thing. So we talked about listing the solutions and evaluating the trade-offs. I kind of merged them together just now. And how I answered it was really by listing out the solutions and then tying it really closely to the trade-offs. And I did talk about customer satisfaction, right? And I mentioned, okay, with customer satisfaction, all these net new customers won't even be able to go on to this platform. The impact on the revenue is actually a net loss in the end, right? If you were to enable this new feature but not fix this critical bug that impacts the new feature, you're actually losing money. And engineering implementation. If we go back to the original question, the question stated clearly that the engineering resources would be the same whether they enabled a new feature or whether they fix the bug. So in this scenario, it's really important to repeat that to your interviewer and let them know that you are aware that the engineering implementation is equal and this is not a factor that is actually relevant to this question. And showing that and stating that will show your interviewer that you are paying attention to the question very carefully and that this is something that is important to consider, but at the same time is not relevant in this particular scenario. And that's something that we like. The reason why we're going through this question is all of these skills are really important in your day-to-day job at Microsoft or any FANG company, really. And so they want to be able to see that you're thinking through all of these things and remembering every aspect on what does it take to build a new feature or what does it take to fix a bug, and really your thought process behind that. Lastly is summarizing your recommendations. So you might have been talking to your interviewer now for almost 20 or 30 minutes. And so it's really time to show them that you've learned a lot through this and that you've been paying attention and that you're critically answering the question, right? And so if I were to summarize my recommendations to the interviewer, I would say, so today we talked about everything about enabling a new feature to fixing a bug for Microsoft's Game Pass product, which is a sub-product of Xbox. We learned about how much revenue Xbox brought versus how much Game Pass is bringing and the pros and cons of enabling a feature versus fixing a bug and all the factors that we discussed relevant to it, right? Whether it's engineering implementation, the amount of revenue being brought to the company, and also the customer satisfaction. After weighing the pros and cons, we came to the conclusion that fixing the bug was the right way to go because fixing the bug impacted A, the new feature, but then B, also it prevented customers from not being able to sign up and prevented a customer group from not being lost as a result, especially since both of them took the same amount of engineering resources. And from there, your interviewer will say, great job, you answered the question successfully and you did XYZ things correct. Or they might even ask you some follow-up questions to ensure that your understanding of the material is very clear. So with that, I'm really happy that you guys stayed with me through this, and I hope I was able to answer all of your questions throughout all of this. And I hope you're able to get a sense of how can you approach a product execution round in the future. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.
Want to become a software engineer at Google? You can, like thousands of our students. You just need to learn from those who've already cleared FANG interviews. At Interview Kickstart, our interview prep courses are developed and taught live by 150 plus instructors from Tier 1 companies like Google and Facebook. Our courses are tailored to help you crack software engineering domain interviews, including back-end, full stack, machine learning, embedded systems, data science, and more. To learn more, book your free webinar slot today